Good evening, everybody. I just want to say what a privilege it is to be here tonight, and I want to thank two Pauls, Paul Webb and Paul Barnett, for inviting Mark and I to be here tonight. I just want this to be your evening. I want this to be a safe space for you to ask questions. If you want to know why things are done a certain way, please let us know, and we'll try to endeavour to answer all your questions. My name is Cheryl Cairns. I'm a community educator at Tauondi Aboriginal College. I've been delivering cultural training, workshops, cultural understanding, lots of cultural stuff for about 30 years to both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. So, it's an honour and pleasure to be here. Do you want to? Thank you. Firstly, I want to, before we go further, acknowledge the Mayor of Gawler, Karen Redmond. We really appreciate Karen being here. I have to acknowledge the Gawler Council website, because some of the information you've got there, particularly around the Welcome to Country, Acknowledgement to Country, has come from the website. And you've got some great information, so well done to the Gawler Council, and really appreciate the efforts that you're doing. Mark is on the Gawler Up Committee, for the Reconciliation Action Plan, and it's always good to be on Reconciliation Action Plan committees, because we get to share information and all that sort of thing. I won't do acknowledgement until Mark does Welcome to Country, and we'll explain why, and I'll get Mark to do Welcome to Country first. Is that okay? Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to read out acknowledgement to country, Welcome to Country, in Kaurna language. So I've written out one explaining myself, and once I've read it in Kaurna language, I will read it out again in English, so you can understand what I said. So, okay. Nankirina Mirina Namani. Nari Mark, Warita Catanzariti. Nankira Narapadla, Cheryl and Catanzariti, Kamani, Narapadla Shari, Wara Watkins. Nai Ghana Yarli. Mani Nadal Tampanti, Ghana Miriana, Yacha, Mathanya, Wama, Tatanyaku. Nadal Tampanti Ghana, Pripiana, Mirina, Paki Paki Nanku Ghana, Pripiana Yalaka. Yalaka Nadal Ghana, Yata, Imparinti, Nachalia Mani Napudni. So, in English, I'll translate that for you guys. Ladies and gentlemen, how are you all tonight? My name is Mark, second born, Catanzariti, from Cheryl and Catanzariti, my mother, and my grandmother is Auntie Cherie Watkins, Healer Watkins, and I'm a Kaurna man. It's good that we recognise and acknowledge that Kaurna people are the traditional Indigenous owners of the Adelaide Plains, and that we acknowledge Kaurna elders past, present and future, and today we're meeting each other on Kaurna land. And thank you, and it's good that you came. So, okay. So, we'll just explain.
I'll do acknowledgement.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry. I can't do Welcome to Country because I'm not Kaurna. Everybody in this room can do acknowledgement to country. You don't have to be Aboriginal to do acknowledgement to country. So I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and that I pay my respects to the Kaurna people to the Kaurna elders, past, present and emerging. They still have a strong connection to the traditional way of life as of times before. And usually I'd also like to acknowledge any other Aboriginal authority, people in the room, if there are. As Paul said, I'm a Gurindji woman, so because I'm Gurindji, I can't do welcome. I'm also firstborn daughter, and my skin name's Nangala. So I'm also a community educator at Tauondi Aboriginal College. I know it's been very controversial in media. It's been misused, my experiences with different workshops that I have. People are like, why do we do Welcome to Country, acknowledgement to country? It gets abused, it's only for special occasions. It's not for every day, you don't do it every day. You don't do acknowledgement or Welcome to Country every day. The reason why we do Welcome to Country is to ensure that you have safe passage when you come onto country. So in the old days, our boundaries were set by the tree lines, by the hills, by the lakes, by the rivers, the ocean. So when somebody wants to come through onto Kaurna land, they have to seek permission. So think about it, your home, all right? Your home, when you welcome people to your home, they knock on your door, you welcome them into your home. If you don't want to answer the door, you don't welcome them into your home. And welcome often was used like that because when ceremonial time was happening, when men's business or women's business was happening, people had to make sure that they weren't intruding. So they would stand by the side, the tree lines or wherever, seeking permission to come onto country, and then they would be welcomed and then steered where they need to go, and so they don't interfere with your business. Does that make sense? So, when you're at home, somebody knocks on your door. I hate it when somebody knocks on my door and I'm having dinner. I don't want to invite them in. It's the same concept, yeah? Yeah. So, want to add anything to that, or? We're tired, we've had a long day.
Just going a bit more to what Cheryl just said. Our boundaries are set out with landmarks, so rivers, certain looking trees, mountain ranges, so nowadays we have fences. So if someone was just to jump over your fence and walk on your property, you wouldn't like it. So basically that's the same sort of thing. You don't want to go into certain places on your property, and this is the sort of the other way of explaining it. Back in them days, it's how it would be. So you can't just walk on property and just go wherever you like, because there might be something there that people wouldn't want you to see, or you can't see, or it's precious to them. So that's why we do welcome to countries. That's why people wait on the boundary lines. Usually they would light a fire so that they can see the smoke, so then people will come over and be like, okay, what's your business here? Whether it be trading or whatnot. So.
And sometimes with welcome to country, it could include a smoking ceremony. You'll see it at the footy on TV, for instance, where the traditional owner would do the welcome to country in language. He may have and to present a smoking ceremony, and that's to
something similar to this.
Very similar to that.
Saltbush and bluebush. It's like a natural sage. It was mainly grown on the coastal lines, along the coast, but now it's sort of everywhere. But this stuff here, once you light it, it's so the meaning of it is basically to let your ancestors know that these people were here on country, and to clear any bad energies or any bad spirits following these people, and then to just bring in good spirits and good energy, and to let people know that they're on country. So this is what we use. This is a kulaman, which I've designed myself, so that's what you will see when you see a smoking being done. I can't do it in here because
I was asked, but I had to send fire alarms.
So yeah, basically like you all know what sage is, and you all know what sage is for. It's basically the same sort of thing, but this is our natural sage. So it grows here.
Yeah.
You can pick it along the shorelines anywhere. So, and I think now it's along the highways too. I see the council's planted everywhere. So
yeah, and when the smoking ceremony, when the kulaman gets passed around in the smoke, we bathe ourselves with the smoke to give us good energy. Yeah. You want to control the?
Next slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we did that.
This.
Oh, we're ahead, aren't we?
So
this is what we're hoping to go through with you this evening. As I said, if we haven't covered everything, you've got a burning question, you want to understand something, please ask. But we, thought we'd talk about. We took the first one. You've got the Aboriginal Australia map. We'll go through that in a minute. Who is an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person? Just want to say, in Australia, we have two First Nations group, if you like. We have Aboriginal Australians and we have the Torres Strait Islanders. So we'll talk about that when we go through the Aboriginal Australia map. You'll be surprised the number of Aboriginal people we have living in Gawler. One of my cousins actually lives here as well. I was asked to talk about stolen generation. Hopefully we've got a video all going well, that will work. Mark's going to talk about his Deadly program, Reconnection to Country project. So when Aboriginal people say deadly, it means good, you know. And because you are a Gawler Historical Society, we decided to add massacre sites as a presentation because it is part of our history. When I say our history, it's part of all of us Australian histories. It's not a nice part of history, but we have to acknowledge that it has happened. And there will be times for questions. Don't have to wait till the end for questions. If you've got a burning desire to ask a question straight away, please interrupt. We don't mind. Okay? Thank you. Yeah. And that was just to let you know some of the context you may find distressing, you know. That is not our intent to distress you, embarrass you, make you feel bad. Our intent is to give you an understanding and awareness, you know. So we thought that was important. We'd say that to you all. Yeah. I really have to thank once again the Gawler Council for their welcome to country and acknowledgement to country. They've got this on the website that explains it really well. We know the Kaurna group that you met with, Kumakaru Cultural Services. Did I say that right?
Kumakara.
Yeah, see, I don't, that's why I don't do language. Kumakara. Mark is actually teaching me Ghana. I'm still a novice, I've got my old plates on. So thank you once again to the Gawler Council, well done. So you've got handouts for that. Hopefully that explains why we do it. And as I said, not to be done every day. What's the next one? So you've got some Aboriginal Australia maps that we've handed out. I'm starting to use that as a bit of a prop for my workshops because we often talk about it. I always say when you look at the Aboriginal Australia map, think of the map of Europe, think of the map of Africa. What does that consist of? The map of Europe and the map of Africa, it's all about different countries. People speak different languages. People have different customs, different foods. Aboriginal Australia is no different. So how many countries do you think we've got? We call them language groups. So how many language groups do you think are in Australia?
800 and something?
No, but you're close to another question, to another answer, yeah? 250. So that's 250 languages and 700 dialects. So Ghana language, other people would speak. On Ghana, they might speak Nottingeri because that's next door to Ghana, or Narunga, you know, so different dialects. English may not be an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person's first language. Quite often, it could be their third, fourth, or fifth language. So somebody asked, what are the red lines around on the map? There were trade routes. You want to talk about that? You're better at that than me.
So the trade routes are on boundaries. Basically, people would follow these trade routes around. Mostly, they're not all like. There's not every single trade route. There's only ones that have been recorded over time from the I think it was a Sherman.
Norman Tyndall.
Norman Tyndall, who came up with this map, mapped this out himself a long time ago. But yeah, they go along boundaries of others, so they wouldn't walk straight through someone else's country. It would just be on boundaries, and then people would meet at all these meeting places there, Adelaide being one here, to trade all sorts of stuff like ochre, hunting tools, skins, certain special types of rocks for using for arrowheads, spearheads, and axe heads. So that's on the trade routes there anyhow. Do you want to?
So we're very grateful to Norman Tyndall. He was an archaeologist, an anthropologist, he was a scientist. And he was one of the first people back in the 1800s that recognised different groups of Aboriginal people on land. He recognised that we weren't just one person. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are very diverse in their own right, as you can see by the map. So we're very grateful for him. This map that we've got on display is also used for native title, so that each group is responsible for their own protection of land, the environment, the seas, and all that sort of thing. Yeah. So,
Do you talk about this?
yeah, Aboriginal history pre-contact. The Aboriginal people are the earliest surviving culture in the history of humankind, having set sustainable ways to manage their society and culture that ensured good health. They have inhabited Australia for no less than 70,000 years. I used to say 65,000, but I was corrected and it's been 70,000. We ask that people don't generalise Aboriginal people, because as you can see there are many nations, all of which are variations of dialects and language, and you'll find the majority of Aboriginal people are territorial, and they will let you know their history and identity. There is significant contact and trade, as Mark said, between the mixed peoples who occupied this continent. However, there is no contact, no interchange of knowledge or cultures among the rest of the world and the First Nations people of Australia. Who were the first people that came to Australia from overseas?
Dutch.
Well done, yeah. The Dutch were the first people. I'll tell you a story about the Dutch. So, you know, we talk about language and how we describe people. So here in South Australia, we might describe a white person as a gunya. Up in the territory, and my sister told me this story, they refer to white people as Ballanders. And the story goes that an old man was on the beach up in the territory in the top end, and he saw the boat come in with all these Dutch people on board, and he was talking. And when he went back to camp, somebody said, we saw you talking to those people on the boat. Who are they? He said, oh, they're Ballanders. They're actually Hollanders. So that's why they use Ballander. You know? I read somewhere recently that when South Australia was first colonised and the local Kaurna people saw white people on their ships, they thought they were ghosts because they'd never seen a white person before, and they were scared. That's why they're ran, you know, who are they? They didn't understand that they were people of different colours. The Timorese were also one of the first that came to Australia and did a trade route with us from overseas. So we have a long history.
Mexicans.
The Mexicans, I knew you'd come up with that. As I was saying to somebody earlier, we've got a fantastic gallery at the college. We'd love to give a second invitation for you to come and visit. Okay, so, you know, quite often people say, well, who is an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person? And as you can tell by the description, an Aboriginal person is a person who is of Aboriginal descent, identifies as an Aboriginal person, and is accepted by the Aboriginal person by the community in which they live. And the Torres Strait Islander person is a person descendant from the Torres Strait Islands, which are located to the north of mainland Australia. I forgot to mention with the Torres Strait Islands, how many islands are in the Torres Strait? About 700.
700.
No, so I've never been there, but that's what I've been told. So, confirmation of Aboriginality, it's used because we know that funding is available for Aboriginal people to close the gap, because our lifespan's a lot less than yours. We have chronic health diseases like diabetes, renal health, heart disease, high infant mortality rates, all those sorts of things. So that's why healthcare, housing and employment. I've got my confirmation of Aboriginality, I got quite a few years ago, and I was actually quite insulted that I had to go out and get it. Because why do I have to, I'm an Aboriginal person, I was always told you're Aboriginal, Cheryl, you know, and be proud of it. Why do I have to have a piece of paper to say I'm Aboriginal? So it's actually come in handy recently, so I take that back in some respects. But we're the only group in Australia that has to prove our identity. Nobody else in Australia has to prove their cultural identity. So we do, unfortunately. I can remember asking for support. Now, I've been working in the Aboriginal community probably for the last 30 years in South Australia. I've travelled around. I've been down to Mount Gambier, Port Augusta, Marie, West Coast, all around. People know me. So I asked this lady, you know, I need my confirmation of Aboriginality. Can you help me? And she said, sorry, Cheryl, we can't. Yes, we acknowledge you as being an Aboriginal person. The community acknowledges you, but we don't know who your parents are or who your grandparents are. My parents and grandparents were in the Northern Territory. So I had to go to the Northern Territory to get that information. I was adopted at the age of 18 months old, so I hate the term stolen generation, but I'm second generation stolen because we have labels. So I went to a place called Gurindji in the city, and they have a link-up program, and they've got case managers there that help people find their birth families. And we'll talk about that a little bit later today. So because I went through Gurindji in the city, they were able to put the community stamp, endorse my Aboriginality with the stamp because they had my records. So they had records of who my mother was, who my father was. And since then I've done my own research. So, you know, yeah, it's a bone of contention with me, but recently it's come in handy, so I guess, you know, swings and roundabouts, right? Yeah, any questions so far?
Which bit of the Northern Territory were you from?
I was born in Wyndham in Western Australia, and my mother's country is Timber Creek. So, should we go back to the Aboriginal Australia now?
I think it was the
Sorry?
other button.
Want to go back?
Yeah.
One more.
So my mother's country is up here, Gurindji, that's my country. So, and Aboriginal people tend to go on the matriarch side. They tend to follow the female line of you know, first. They acknowledge the matriarch side first before the patriarch side. Yeah, thank you. So, beginning in the late 19th century, colonial state governments began enacting protectionist policies that made Indigenous people wards of the state. This involved controlling all aspects of their lives via a system of reserve confinement, institutionalisation and forced child removals. So as you can see, the 1834 South Australian Colonisation Act, administrative power in the colony was divided between the governor and a resident commission who was responsible for the survey and sale of land and for migration arrangements and funding. And South Australia was to be colonised by assisted immigration financed by land sales. The Act allowed for 3 or more appointed commissioners, called the Colonisation Commissioners for South Australia, to oversee the sale and leasing of land in South Australia to British subjects, and the commissioners were empowered by the Act in a number of areas. So the difference between when colonisation happened, we had a society that was agricultural. And so in agricultural society, they put up fences, don't they? You know, this is my parcel of land, I'm going to put a fence around it. In Aboriginal society, we're a hunting gathering society. So our fence, as I said, it was the tree line, it was the ocean, it might have been the mountain range, that was our fencing. So when colonisation happened, we had a clash of culture. And that's where the angst came into it. So 1842, the Wastelands Act, Parliamentary Act passed in Britain for regulating the sale of wasteland belonging to the Crown in the Australian colonies. Basically, it was, well, land not being occupied. That's what the land was not being occupied because of the difference of agricultural society as opposed to hunting and gathering society. Establishments of missions or reserves went between 1850 to 1920. So missions, reserves and stations were reserves of land to which Aboriginal people were forcibly relocated. So missions were in the control of churches and missionaries with little or no government involvement. Reserves and stations were generally run by the government, although churches, especially the United Aborigines Mission and the Aborigines Inland Mission, were sometimes active on government settlements although they didn't always have an administrative role. Aboriginal reserves were overseen by government protectors who controlled many aspects of the lives of Aboriginal people. We quite often, I know people that were brought up on mission, in mission life, and often they would say, and excuse the language, used to hate that bloody bell. They were governed by the bell. When to get up, when to go to work, when to go to school, when to have lunch, when to come home. And that was controlled by the mission. So, yeah, often people say, oh, you know, their lives were controlled, unfortunately. 1911 was the Aborigines Protection Act, an act to make provision for the better protection and control of the Aboriginal and half-caste inhabitants of the state of South Australia. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Then we had the assimilation era. The 1937, did you want to read any of this out?
No, I can read that if you like.
Yeah, I'm getting a sore throat, I need a drink. Thank you.
Where are we? Yeah.
1937.
So in 1937, the Commonwealth Government held a national conference on Aboriginal affairs, which agreed that Aboriginal people, well, not non-full-blood Aboriginal people, should be absorbed or assimilated into the wider population. The aim of assimilation was to make the Aboriginal problem gradually disappear so that Aboriginal people would lose their identity in the wider community. Another major feature of the assimilation policy was stepping up the forcible removal of Indigenous children from their families and their placement in white institutions or foster homes. That was mainly like a half-caste, they would call them, Aboriginal kids, and not always, but mainly half-caste Aboriginal kids would be taken away by the policemen and then put into you know, these missions. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. There's a slide for that a bit later down there. So, who knows about the British atomic bombs in Maralinga? Yeah? I'm sure we would all have, being back then.
I looked after a woman many years ago. Aboriginal woman came down from Kudapidi and she sang in her language and she said that Aboriginal people were bombed.
Yeah,
They were bombed.
yeah, 100%. So there was a little scout group. You probably already know all this, but I'll just go over it again. There was a little scout group that was sent out by the government to have a look around for any people living in the area, which wasn't done properly. It wasn't, you know, it was nowhere near done properly. Probably done with no care at all. And then the people that were a part of the testing were made to stand there and face it with sunglasses on. So I've looked into this a lot, you know, and the amount of radiation that, you know, I think it even made it over here to Adelaide from up in the sky. All that there caused a lot of medical issues with a lot of people, generational medical issues as well. You know, the list goes on with how bad that was. Yeah, so between 1956 and 63, the United Kingdom conducted several nuclear tests at the Maralinga site. Part of the Woomera prohibited area, about 800 kilometres north-west of Adelaide. Two major test sites series were conducted. Operation Buffalo, 1956, and Operation Antler in the following year. So, yeah, that to me was like a very disastrous thing to even think about doing on anywhere. So I think because they deemed the land what's the word?
Uninhabitable.
Yeah, nobody was around. So let's just put a bomb here, be right. So yeah, but you know, what are we now? How many years later? 50 more plus 70.
You know I failed maths.
Yeah,
Maths is my weak subject.
And you still can't go out there because the radiation's still in the ground. So you know
It's sad that it's happened, but the impact it had, I guess, not only the impact it had on everybody, and I guess, you know, that's what history teaches us what not to do sometimes, doesn't it? Yeah.
Some of those huts in Maralinga were taken down to Fort Mars Police Academy, and the cadets actually
Yeah.
lived in them. My husband actually lived in one of those huts, and the course he was in course 7, but several of the people, not just in his course, but that were there when he was there, they actually ended up having brain tumours and dying
Yeah.
of brain tumours.
Yeah.
And they tried, when they went back to test the soil, because they thought it was probably coming from the huts, they couldn't because the huts had been destroyed and they built a building on top of the soil, so they couldn't actually take sort of samples of the soil.
Yeah.
But that's just a thing that's years later.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And sadly, they didn't know what they were doing at the
No,
time,
no.
you know, and you know, they were focusing on one aspect of life, you know, we know about wars, and they were looking at how do we keep Australia safe, but not realising the consequences further down the track, unfortunately. Yeah. You want to keep going?
Yeah, I'll keep going, yeah. So we'll go to the 62 Aboriginal Affairs Act. The Aboriginal Affairs Act marked an important turning point in the state government policy, removing many discriminatory aspects of previous legislation, such as the system of exemptions, the power to restrict Aboriginal access to certain town and districts, and the offence of consorting. So in the mission times, you had to get an exemption to leave the mission, so and it had to be stamped. We don't have it here today. There is pictures of it, you know, where you would have to ask for permission to leave the mission, and also there was that comes later with to say you weren't Aboriginal.
That was also the exemption.
The exemption,
Part of the exemption, mainly for lighter-skinned Aboriginal people, where they had to denounce their Aboriginality so that they can then look at getting work, housing, healthcare, all that sort of thing. They couldn't get it while they identified as being Aboriginal. They got the piece of paper to say they were exempt. That caused a lot of friction between the different communities and the missions. But you know, it's neither right or wrong. People do what they've got to do, you know. So, yeah, the exemption, consorting laws. Now, I'm in a mixed marriage, as Paul knows. Yeah. He tells me that all the time. For those that don't know, Paul was our best man at our wedding, and he's still our best man. So I'm glad I met Alan in the 80s and not in the 50s or 60s, because if we'd met and we were dating, we were considered consorting, because Aboriginal people and white people were not allowed to mix. If they mixed, both people were thrown in jail for consorting. That was the consorting laws. So, yeah, as I said, you know, we've come a long way, I think. Yeah.
So 1967, Aboriginal citizenship referendum. Does anyone know about that?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's when I became an Australian citizen.
Yep. So no longer plant or animals, became humans. So so you already know about that. So that's good.
Sorry to interrupt. The 1967 referendum, although it was very positive, it also did a huge injustice to Aboriginal people, because what that meant was that they were able to drink alcohol. They could go to the pub and drink alcohol. And I had a Kaurna elder tell me, she said, you know, I remember watching the vote in the pub front bar, and when it was said yes, everybody cheered and we all rushed to the front bar to get a drink, you know. What happened after that, because with alcohol, you've got to drink alcohol with respect. They all became alcoholics, well, not all of them, but most of them became alcoholics because they didn't know how to drink alcohol, and then that in turn created more problems. You know, we know what alcohol and drug abuse does in any society, but that was the downfall in some respects. So even though we got the right to vote, got the right to buy a beer, we didn't learn how to drink properly, and as I said, it did cause problems. So I always remember that story she told me. She's passed on, so I can't mention her name.
Just watch that.
I know, he always tells me off for my WHS. Thank you, Mark.
So on the 27th of May 1967, Australians voted to change the constitution so that, like all other Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, would be counted as part of the population, and the Commonwealth would be able to make laws for them. So the next one we'll go to
Self-determination era?
where are we? Yep, self-determination.
Oh no,
era.
sorry, you've got the equal.
The Equal Wages Act. So in 1968, Aboriginal pastoral workers in the Northern Territory are paid far lower wages than non-Indigenous workers and generally live in terrible conditions.
Very important strike on Wayfield.
Yep.
That's my mob. Vincent
Very
Wangari.
important, yeah.
It was a very important, very important. You know how long did that strike go for?
Yes.
7. You know, and it was at Gulf Wetland that gave the land back. So it was also the start of the native title agreement, when Gulf Wetland picked up the dirt and poured the dirt into Vincent Wangari's hand and said, "You now have your country back." So, very pivotal moment in history for us.
So the self-determination era. We've got the 1980 Heritage Act, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act 1984 is a legislation passed by the Parliament of the Commonwealth of Australia to enable the Commonwealth to intervene and, where necessary, preserve and protect areas and objects of particular significance to Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So, you know, I think even still today the Heritage Act doesn't work that great. You know, I can give out a few examples, but I probably won't. So it's very sort of touchy subjects for me here in South Australia that we have with that Heritage Act. But some things get protected, some things don't. So we'll move on to the 1981. Do you want to say anything on that or not? No? Okay.
I think we'll leave that.
We'll leave that.
Yeah.
So 1981, the Pitjantjatjara Aboriginal Land Rights Act. This legislation recognising the traditional rights of the Pitjantjatjara people to their lands was introduced by the government of Don Dunstan. So do we all know where Pitjantjatjara is? What
The
sort
APY
of
lands? Yeah.
APY lands, a little bit up north there, top of South Australia.
Yeah.
Top left.
Pitjantjatjara.
No?
Is it the Flinders, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, not the
So,
Flinders, no, a bit higher.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Andaman and Gawler.
Yeah.
So the APY lands, which came as a result of the Pitjantjatjara Aboriginal land rights, includes the Anagu, the Pitjantjatjara and the Yankadjara people. So they formed the APY lands. And they spread from South Australia, Western Australia, the Northern Territory, so they've got huge lands. You have to get a permit to go on their lands because they still, they're still very strong in culture. In December...
Right here on the map.
Yeah.
You can see it's about there on your map.
Yeah.
The light blue colour,
Yeah.
top of South Australia.
So, you know, in December I was asked to go up to do some training, but I had a very small window in December, you know, to go up, be there for a week, because it's travel to get there, stay and do a couple of days training and then travel back home. If I left it the second week of December, I would have been stuck up there for 3 months because they were doing business. So they do, there's certain times of the year you cannot go unless you've got permission, because they're very strong in their culture. We've got, we call them the Anagu mob. We've got them on site at the college, the Erie, where they have a safe place, they do their artwork. The Anagu choir, what are they not? The women do choir, they sing in language. Hearing the Australian national anthem sung in language is a beautiful thing to hear. You know, it gives me goosebumps just listening to it. I don't speak language.
They do their language there as well, and they do lots of artwork there too. So it's a good place for them to come to and do all that stuff. So 1987, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. So this one here, I was kind of a bit of an advocate for. Up to date, there's 562 deaths in custody since '91, and not one of them has been, anyone has been held accountable for. All deaths were in police custody. So, there's a couple of stories there. John Pat, young fella in 1984, was sticking up for a mate of his in Sydney, I think it was. A group of police officers, off-duty police officers in a bar, a bit drunk, decided to start teasing an Aboriginal fella, and this young fella, John Pat, he stood up for him, and they ended up beating him up, ringing up one of the other police officers to bring the paddy wagon down, chucked him in the back, and he died. So
the duty of care wasn't happening. And you know, the reason why we're very passionate about it, we have the highest rate of incarceration, we have the highest rate of unemployment, we were denied education. Now we've got education, we've got ministers, we've got parliamentarians, we've got judges, nurses, doctors. You know, our kids are staying on to year 12 despite that. So, you know, that's improved. Highest infant mortality rate, chronic diseases, diabetes, heart failure, renal, you know, kidney diseases. So, you know, these are our contemporary issues that we're still trying to overcome. But the Aboriginal deaths in custody, it's very traumatic when you know family members who have suicided in jail and how they've suicided. So this is why we do talk about it. You know, traditionally it was always mainly men that were highly incarcerated, now are women. And the reasons why they're going to jail is trivial. Oh, didn't pay the parking fine. You know? So what's happening to our children? Well, the grandparents are looking after them if they've got them. So this is the history that's not talked about and not shared. You know, we go back to the warning at the beginning, but this is the history that's not shared. Yeah.
So we'll go to the 92 High Court Mabo decision, which I think yesterday or the day before was the anniversary of that.
Yeah.
So the Mabo case was a significant legal case in Australia that recognised the land rights of the Meriam people, traditional owners of the Murray Islands, which include the islands of Mer, Dyer and Waya in the Torres Strait up top there. The Mabo case was successful in overturning the myth that at the time of the colonisation Australia was terra nullius, or land belonging to no one.
For Eddie Mabo, it was a shame that he passed away before he got to see all his hard work, what's the word I'm looking for, all his hard work being achieved. You know, he got land rights. But the reason why it took so long, you know, when we'll talk about family structures. We're talking about family structures a bit
No, I
later.
don't think it's in there.
No. I digress in my training, so I will talk about family structures. Most Anglo-Australians would count 50 members as their family, yeah? You know, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins. An Aboriginal family would count 500 members as their family. I know a man who was doing his family tree, and he told me 3 years ago, Cheryl, I've got 150 first cousins. Because in those days, his parents had 18 children, father, you know, they all had big families. So, you know, 150 cousins. We often talk about the immediate family. You know, you mainly refer to your immediate family. Sometimes you may refer to your extended family. We do that. Then we have our kinship. Then what comes after that? Our elders, and then our community. So we look after everybody in our communities. So for kinship, think of all the ladies in the room who have sisters. How many children do your sisters have? Think about that for a minute. All of the men in the room who have brothers, how many children do your brothers have? So for the ladies in the room who has sisters with children, they're your children, and you're their mother. That's how kinship's working. For the men in the room, your brother's children are your children. Now for the ladies in the room who have brothers and have children, the brothers have children, they're your children's first cousin, and vice versa for the men in the room. The men in the room, if they've got sisters who have children, they become cousins to your children. But not, yeah, and there's lots of societies that it's the same. So I gave birth to a boy, but I've got 5 daughters. I've got 18 grandchildren. I'm glad they live in Top Pen, Paul, I can tell you.
Expensive Christmas presents.
I know, yeah. So that, you know, so that's how kinship works. And then with the parents, so, you know, yeah. Does that make sense? So when you do your family tree, I want you to think about that. Think about your sister's children. They're your sons and daughters. For the men, your brother's children, they're your sons and daughters. So it gets big and bigger and bigger, doesn't
Living
it?
in a community where you're all together, you know, you all have obligations to look after each other.
Yep.
And because you're so close and there's no other groups involved, that's why it's so tight like that.
Yeah. That's why housing, we talk about overcrowding and housing in society. I had a woman who told me a few weeks ago, she'd worked out in a remote community, and she said, you've got 32 members of the family living in a 3-bedroom house, and they were forever getting the toilet door fixed because 32 people go in the toilet. And how many times you go to the toilet? Times that by 32, the door comes off its hinges, you know. These are problems, you know, and then if you haven't got access, you know, to water for that sort of thing, yeah.
Okay, I'll read out the last 3 acts that we have.
And I'll shut up.
No, I'll read them and you elaborate on them.
All right.
Good teamwork.
Deadly.
So we'll go with the 83 Native Title Act. The purpose of this act is to provide for land rights for Aboriginal people in New South Wales. Further, this act provides the creation of Aboriginal Land Councils, Native Title Act 93, ensuring that Aboriginal peoples in Torres Strait Islander receive the full recognition and status within the Australian nation to which history, their prior rights and interests, and their rich and diverse culture fully entitle them to aspire.
Yeah, and for native title, people still live in traditional ways, and it's preserving our culture. Native title is about preserving our culture. You know, we've had native title, we're all on native title land, you know, but we do have native title councils who ensure that there's plenty of fish in the ocean or the rivers, you know. Let's plant the bush plants, you know, and as Mark said earlier with that, you know. I can remember when native title first came out, my brother was upset because the perception was, oh, my land, my house, my back garden's going to be taken over, Aboriginal people are going to own it. What does that leave me? Had nothing to do with it. I'm not really quite well versed on native title. I know people that, and it's not because I don't have country to care for, you know. And it's native title is about caring for country. We were the first environmentalists, the first astronomers, the first
Farmers.
you know, by using the land, you know. So when we talk about being on country, being on land is sacred. We do have our sacred sites, which is a different thing. But we need to look after Mother Earth. We've always looked after Mother Earth. I was really pleased to hear that people are starting to acknowledge the burnings, you know, to reduce fires, you know, in summertime when we have the bushfires. We used to, traditionally, fire season was controlled fires were made. And that was to get rid of the dead grass, the dead wood, make sure that, you know, bush fires didn't happen, and also to allow the new seeds to drop and what's the word when you go in the ground? Regenerate, thank you. So it's good to see now that people are starting to pay attention to our way of doing, that we've been doing for 60, 70,000 years. Yeah. So that's why that's basically what native title is about, keeping our traditional ways of looking after land. Got the word out, land.
Some people are mistaken. They're thinking that they're going to lose their property or their house or whatever. It's nothing like that.
Yeah.
So don't be confused with that. Okay, so the 2008 National Apology to the Stolen Generations. We remember that.
Yeah.
Who did that apology? Kevin Rudd. So on the 13th of February 2008, Prime Minister Kevin Rudd offered a formal apology to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, particularly the stolen generation, on behalf of the nation at Australia Parliament House between 1910 and 1970. Thousands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children were forcibly removed from their families and communities by churches, welfare organisations and governments. Do you want to add to that or not? We're going to talk about that a bit later.
When we've got the video, we'll show the video and I'll talk a little bit about that.
The last one I'll read out and I'll let you take over. So the Indigenous Voice referendum on the 14th of October 2023, Australians voted in a referendum about whether to change the constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. It was the first referendum of the 21st century. The referendum did not pass. South Australia's First Nations Voice to Parliament, the Voice, was designed through extensive engagement with First Nations people living within the state, led by the SA Commissioner for First Nations Voice, Dale Agus. The federal referendum was separate from and does not affect the SA Voice and First Nations Voice to Parliament. So it's a completely separate thing. It's not a national thing. It's just a South Australian. The Voice represented by an elected body of First Nations people. Through the Voice, First Nations people will have their say at the highest levels of decision making, including to Parliament, government, on matters including policies and laws that affect their families and communities.
So 2023, the referendum, we all voted in the referendum. And that was just, even though in 1967 I became an Australian citizen, I'm still not included in the Australian Constitution, nor is Mark. And that was what that was all about. But the media, the opposition, I'm not going to name her, other people had turned it into a frenzy and confused people with the yes or no vote. It was frightening. It was frightening. So 7.2 million people voted no. And a lot of that was confusion, you know. So 6.1 million voted yes. So I take small comfort in that. But what the referendum, 2023 referendum, there's still Aboriginal people today that are very, very angry, very sore, very hurt by that decision. The second part that Mark was referring to was the South Australian Voice to Parliament, which Dale Agus was the commissioner for that, where he extensively went around all the communities in South Australia to talk about us having a voice with the South Australian Parliament. Nominating yourself as a candidate. There were 7 regions split up to represent all the different communities and language groups. We went to vote earlier this year, and it's to give us a seat in Parliament. We know what the problems are in our communities. We also know what the solutions are. And it's about changing policies, basically. It's about changing laws and policies that so that we don't get denied anything anymore. With the South Australian Voice to Parliament, it was only open to Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people, but it wasn't compulsory. So the girl, one of the women that won, her father had the 150 cousins, she got in because family voted family in. And that's how it was. But also, that could have been promoted better as well. But we've got our candidates, we've nominated them. They've been having meetings with government to talk, you know, in different regions to talk about what's best for their own communities. So we're slowly getting there. I have to keep that faith.
Any questions on this at all? Yep.
Just a quick one. On the levels of incarceration, and you said a lot of it's trivial, you know, maybe parking fines, whatever, but they've done some studies in the US on the fact that they have a large non-white incarceration level, particularly African Americans, and there's a very strong case coming out of that. Now, a lot of that crime that's being committed is because of breakdown in the traditional families, where there's like 80% now, where it's a single mother with X number of children, there's no father. Is that similar to what could be happening in the population here, or is it do you think it's a different?
It's definitely different. Most of the incarcerations are over small things. You know, I'll give you an example. There was a lady in Melbourne, and she was always known as a very a popular lady, and she had a good job. But this one particular night, she was having a bad night, a breakup. She had a couple of drinks, and she doesn't drink. Ended up on the train, drunk on the train. Somebody called the police saying there was a drunk Aboriginal woman on the train. So the police came, and instead of assisting her or trying to help her, in any way, they decided to just throw her in the prison for the night. For the night or whatever they were thinking. And then, as they were throwing her in the jail cell, she hit her head on the, so they had the concrete bases. She'll be right. And she ended up dying. So, she'll be right. So, yeah. So that's a little example. Examples of maybe stealing some food, being locked up, and then it gets pretty extreme. The police manhandle these people too much. One was over a cookie. The guy had diabetes and he needed some sugar. So he had a cookie and they told him to put the cookie down. He didn't want to put the cookie down because he needed it. And about, I think, 9 or 10 police officers went in there and just crushed him. And he died also. So there's
It's unnecessary.
Okay, so
the reasoning
family groups are fairly strong still, which is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Okay, again, if they get into that trivial about biscuits.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Not.
And I'm glad you brought that. Sorry to
No, you're
interrupt,
right.
Mark. I'm glad you brought that up, Paul, because we also have law, L-O-R-E. So a person, we walk in two worlds basically. You can commit a crime and get thrown in jail through white man's law, if you like. Sorry to phrase it like that. For committing the same crime, particularly if it's affected another person in the community, you go through law. So what happens at certain times of the year, communities would gather. I did this service to Mark. I have to be punished because I stole his car. So I get punished by the community. The women will circle me around and they would punish me. So women on women. They might hit me over the head with waddies. For men, they could get speared. You have to come to the gallery. When I first met my mother, my birth mother, so she was a traditional elder up in Timber Creek. And I met my sister, they lived in Darwin, Catherine, top end. My sister would phone me up quite regularly. Once a week I'd get a phone call from Darwin, we'd have a yarn with my 5 daughters. And didn't hear from her for a while. And I tried to phone and a couple of months had gone by and I thought, oh, maybe I've offended her. Oh well, what can I do? Then she phones up and this is what I heard on the other, she's okay, she's out of hospital now. So you can imagine what was going through my head at the time. I said, what are you talking about? Because was it one of the girls? It was Mum had come out of hospital. Mum had gone through law and a nephew had wronged a family. He did not attend that practice, the law. So the next of kin gets punished, and guess who was next of kin for the nephew? My mother. She got hit over the head several times with a waddy and ended up in hospital. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? So I said, well, and I was enraged. Do I fly to Darwin? What do I do? And my sister said, no, it's okay. She said, because that nephew now owes Mum for the next 12 months. He has to be, whatever Mum wants, he has to do. He has to be at her beck and call. So if Mum's living in Darwin and she wants to go home to Timber Creek, he has to drive her there and bring her back. If he wins $100 on the pokey, hand it over. If she hasn't got any food in the cupboard, he has to go buy for it. So, so that's the balance of that. I remember, in our traditional ways, we never had jails when we punished people. So, the deaths in custody, it causes confusion for a lot of people. That's not how we dealt with punishment. We dealt with punishment physically, basically. Punishment would also be happening if you married out of your skin name, or you can only marry certain people. So yeah, it's very. So I said I was Nungala. My skin name's Nungala, which means I cannot marry Jungler. I'm digressing, Mark, sorry.
That's right.
At the college, I was mentoring students. I had a man came down from Catherine, so I was getting to know him, finding out how I can support him. He told me his name, he was from Catherine, he told me his mob, told me who his parents were, because that's how we identify with each other. And then he turned around and he said, oh, and I'm Jungler. And I said, oh, well, I'm Nungala. He looks at me, and he's looking at me, and then he said, you're my mother. So that's the relationship. So obviously I can't marry him because he's my son.
Punishments were justified to a certain degree of what you've done wrong. So if it was something small, you wouldn't get beat very badly, or like that. You'd have to have done something pretty severe to cop a punishment like that. But they were all justified to a certain level depending on what you've done wrong. So being hit or speared is serious stuff. He would have had to have done something pretty bad.
Spearing would happen if they married who they weren't supposed to marry, because and it could even be your first cousin. There were very strict laws around marriage.
Okay.
We're going to change the tone now.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I'm glad the family group is still strong as against the American model.
Yeah. Completely different American mob to here as well. So, but yeah.
Great, thank you.
Hey, it worked. I'm not good with technology. Did you know that you have 332 Aboriginal men living in Gawler? And 326 women living in Gawler. So this came from the website. So did we talk about what is an Aboriginal person? We did?
Yep.
I'm getting tired.
Yep.
If we can play the video, we're going to talk about the story of generation.
The story of our communities, people and nation starts a long, long time ago. More than 60,000 years, in fact. This was when our culture and our law first started to thrive. We knew who we were and where we belonged. We took care of each other, our land and our waters. We ate food that made us healthy, lived on country and abided by our laws and song lines. Our families, our children were happy, with strong minds and hearts, because they were where they belonged. But then, everything changed.
Colonisation came, bringing wars, disease, famine, violence, and the destruction and violation of our cultural laws, sacred sites, families, and communities.
We were denied our knowledge, language, ceremonies, and identity, the very things that tell us who we are and where we belong. And our connections with each other and the land grew weak.
And then, our children were taken from us. They had their names changed and their identities stripped away. They were told that Aboriginal people were bad. Worse still, they were told that their parents and grandparents did not want them.
For years this happened, and those children became known as the stolen generations.
Our children were denied love and experienced physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. This left very deep, very complex, and very real wounds, leaving scars that are still being felt personally, socially, spiritually, and collectively.
In the time when our story started, we were able to parent in the cultural way that has seen our families survive and thrive for generations. Our people were strong, and our culture flowed and healed us in times of hurt.
But since the trauma of colonisation and the stolen generations, we have not been able to heal in the same way. And we have unknowingly passed this trauma on to our children through sharing our sad stories and having them witness and experience our pain. This is known as intergenerational trauma, and we see symptoms today in broken relationships, disconnected families, violence, suicide, and drug and alcohol abuse.
But this is not where our story ends. We still have strong minds and hearts, and we still know who we were and where we belong. By creating safe and strong communities together, supporting our families to be free from pain, returning to our culture and building a strength of identity, we can stop the cycle of trauma and bring about positive intergenerational change, so that we can continue to thrive for the next 60,000 years. There are simple things that we can all do to help heal our trauma.
Visit healingfoundation.org.au to find out more.
Has anybody watched Rabbit Proof Fence? Yeah. I remember when it was being filmed, there was the story about how it got. One of the girls, were all three girls South Australian or just the one?
Two of them.
Two of the girls in that movie were South Australian. They're now adult women, believe it or not. When I was at work, the courier driver, I had a good relationship with him. He'd always pop in and always say hello, and depending on the time of day, I'd say, got time for a cuppa, we had a good relationship. And he came in one day really distressed, and he said, Cheryl, he said, I watch Rabbit Proof Fence on the weekend. I said, yeah. He said, you've seen it? And I said, yeah. He said, it didn't happen, did it? It's not true, is it? He was traumatised by that. And I said, yeah, mate, it's a true story. It's based on a true story. In fact, one of those women only passed away a few years ago. Stolen generation is, every Aboriginal family in Australia is affected by stolen generation, unfortunately. Yeah.
One of the girls in the movie, or girl at the time, she's here from Adelaide as well. She lives here. Two of them, sorry. So, being based on a true story, like these three girls, they travelled like 2,400 kilometres in 9 weeks, lived off the land for 9 weeks. They were taught at a young age by their parents, how to navigate and live off the land, so lucky for them. I think only two of them made it back. One of them was caught. The littler one was caught.
Yeah.
So the generational effect passing down from generation to generation, was suffering from loss of land, loss of identity and families, loss of hunting grounds and places that have meaning to families, loss of ownership and forceful removal of children placed into missions to be trained and then sold off. This still greatly affects many people today. What I mean by trained and sold off, so most of the missions would collect the young Aboriginal kids, and if they were boys, they would be taught to work on the land, and if they were girls, they were taught to clean and cook and do all that.
Domestic servants.
And count money, so they would be able to go to the shop and buy stuff. And then even advertised in the paper. I don't know if any of you would have that would be in the early 50s, would it?
What's that?
But back in them times when they were with the missions and that.
50s, 60s, yeah.
So basically trained up to be able to, do all these things and then advertise in the paper. I think even King Philip now, back then Prince.
Oh, Prince.
Even visited one of them. I think there is actually a photo of that. Visited one of the missions. Got all the little girls lined up in a row. About this high. 5, 6-year-olds. And then all the people in the background. There for a field day, waiting to buy one. Really, it's just me saying that. It's just ridiculous. So back then it was normal. So that was the stolen generation. the trauma that they go through, and people from the stolen generation, have gone through. I'll let you read that part.
No, I don't want to.
You don't want to?
No.
Okay.
No, we'll move on, if that's okay. I'm just conscious of time.
Okay.
What time have we got?
What is it?
A little bit, it's 10 to 9 now,
Yeah.
so.
10 to 9.
And we were worried we didn't have enough information. Yeah, that's why I'm not ready.
Well, I'm glad you're all still awake.
We're not fidgeting.
So I've sort of spoken about the connecting the country thing already. So this is, where's that mouse going, sorry? Just want to click the,
Yep.
yeah, so I've kind of spoken about this already. It's a project that I'm doing. Today I just designed a Reconnection the Country project for youth to join up with the elders and just create projects just for acknowledgement of Kaurna people on Kaurna land, but also other countries. So Gurindji is down south. That'll be the Coorong area. Naranga is the peninsula area. So branching out to those areas too. That's what this is based on, just for acknowledgement of language, history, and culture. So we'll skip that one to the next one then. Massacre sites. So more than 250. So the massacre sites were obviously designed not to be discovered, but the ones that have been discovered, there are 250 of them all over the country. Where there will be 20, 30 people, women, children and men, killed at each time, just for whatever reasons. Tasmania was really bad for it. Tasmania was, it was basically a sport on Saturdays in Tasmania for, the locals to go out and, shoot, get their dogs, hunt and shoot, and, Tasmania really bad. Here was bad too, but Tasmania was worse. Being such a secluded place from the mainland, back then people thought they could do whatever they liked. I don't know, people are people to me. It doesn't matter what colour you are or where you come from. That should have been the same thought back then, but obviously not.
Massacres by the white man or by the Aborigines.
British and colonisers. This wouldn't be like this is mainly from the colonising.
Aboriginal people did fight back, and that's a really good question that you asked. We did fight back, but you're fighting back with wood, boomerangs and spears as opposed to bullets.
No, what I meant was that these were massacres done by the white man, not massacres, not Aborigines against Aborigines.
Oh, beg your pardon. Yes. Yeah. The intent, the government back in the day had the intent to get rid of us, basically. They wanted to breed us out and all that sort of thing.
The year 2000.
Yeah, we're still here.
They wanted Aboriginal people eradicated.
Sorry to put that negative spin on people, but Mark and I talked about this with another colleague, and because you are a historical society, we have to tell true history, because a lot of people don't know that it happened. I remember when I first started doing cultural training, people used to get upset, but I wasn't born then, why am I being blamed? We're not blaming anybody. All we want is people to be aware that this is what happened in Australia at the time. Because we can't move forward as a nation if we don't know our true story, our true history. And, that's why we named tonight's workshop Cultural Understanding, to have an understanding. And you're all very well, you've been a brilliant group of people to talk to tonight. So one thing I didn't talk about, when we talk about Aboriginal identity, who's heard the term Nunga? Do you know what that means?
Yes,
So Mark and I are Nungas because we're South Australian. So when somebody says, hey, Nunga, I know they're from South Australia. When somebody says Nunga, I know they're from Western Australia. When they say Palawa, they're Tasmania. When they say Kuri, the Eastern States. Muri, Upper Queensland. And Northern Territory, Yongle. But most of them will go by their name on the map, Larrakia or whatever. So it's a collective term that we refer to each other. So, quite often somebody will say, Nunga, and I'll turn around and look, and then we start our conversation. What's your name? Who's your mob? Where you from? So that's just how we communicate with each other and identify with each other. Yeah.
Next slide, please.
Questions?
Any questions?
You haven't mentioned football.
So
She's disappointed. Sorry.
Did the Crows win or not?
Don't know yet, we've got to find out.
Okay.
22 points down.
No, I didn't mean like that, but as far as I'm concerned, you'd hear about Aborigines playing football when you hadn't even realised there were any about.
Lots of good footballers, Aboriginal
Yes.
footballers
Yeah.
as well. So
When you, sorry, when you use the word nunga or nanga, that's not a term that if I don't know you, I can't use. As a white person, I can't use that term.
yeah, it's a collective. Of course you can.
You can.
Yeah.
also depending how you're using it, you know, if you're in a, like if you're just going to shout out to someone you don't know, like, you know, they're probably going to look at you and go, like,
Oh.
you know, what the heck? But if you know the person, you know, obviously it's a good relationship.
Friendship term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
friendship term. Yeah.
Actually, I've got to be careful on that. I went to Welcome to Country up in the Flinders Ranges, Adnamatna. We went to Welcome to Country, and the man that was talking to us, the traditional owner, he said, got to be mindful of language because, you know, one word can mean a different, you know, the same word can mean a different meaning in different languages. We all get that, right? And he said, when I went to Adelaide, I'm walking down Rundle Street and somebody's yelling, hey, Nunga. He's waving to him because in his language, Nunga means hello. So, you know, you've got to be mindful, I guess. I should backtrack and just be mindful that you might be saying hello to a Nadmatna person and they might appreciate that. Paul, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, some of the events I've been in the past, if I haven't, if we have some lively discussions. You hear traditional owners and you hear custodians. Now, I wait a minute and said, well, in my understanding, me as an individual, an owner, you own it, you have full rights to that. Custodian, you're looking after it on behalf of yourself and others.
Yep.
So somebody else said to me, well, how can you be a custodian if you don't actually own it, but you're also an owner? Differentiate how that fits.
Custodians is a collective, so like you would use it as a whole group. So the traditional custodians of the land, and when you want to make a zone down on it, basically Kaurna land. So for me, I live here. I'm a traditional owner, whereas Cheryl, she's from up north. That's her traditional lands up there. So she's a custodian, but as a collective, as a whole group, with traditional custodians of the land.
Okay, so that's more an umbrella of the custodian one.
Basically, yes.
Going down.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thanks for asking that, yeah.
Did you want a question, sorry?
I'm just trying to form the question. I guess we keep talking or acknowledging that the meeting of the two rivers is significant in Ghana.
Yeah.
And it was a trading.
Yep.
And there seems to be, and I think it's slowly getting sorted out, as to who was moving through the Gawler region.
Okay, yes.
Is it Ghana? Is it
Paramount.
Paramount? Is it Nunga? Or
Yeah,
is it, is it clear yet, or we're still working on that?
I'm not sure exactly because that's through native title stuff. From the map that I showed you earlier, or that we showed you earlier, the boundaries were set out then. But if there's more recent finds of, say, the Paramount group being down here, then it expands. Paramount group is very their land is very small here. I think it's just from just in the hills area up to Monado, the edge of Gawler to Monado. But I would say it's more Ghana, but that's out of my hands.
Well, no.
And that's a great question, by the way, because this map changes quite regularly because of the archaeologists, the anthropologists, Aboriginal knowledge. So this map's changed several times over the years, you know, based on different knowledge. So.
But Tim Sale was a South Australian, so we should acknowledge that it was a
Thank you.
South
He was
Australian.
too. He was. We're very grateful to him. You know, we're very grateful to him.
And the other thing that's happened last week in Reconciliation Week was there was an interactive map that was created with a number of organisations that actually drills down on some of those massacre sites and gives you the details. And it's massacres and also confrontations that occurred. And that's I found that a really informative, having a look and seeing, sometimes they were large groups, sometimes they were smaller groups, but again, it's actually giving us the information. So it was I thought it was a great resource that came out last week.
I'm looking forward to exploring that one because I'd read about it and I've got to explore that one. Any
Anything
other
else?
questions? Thank you very much. You've been fantastic. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Cheryl and Mark. You've given us a lot to think about, a lot to take on board. A very enlightening night. I've enjoyed it. It's a parallel history that I suppose is now only starting to integrate into the big picture of things, which is our future for all of us. So it's on behalf of the Gawler history team and our guests, I thank you very much. And we have a gift basket for each of you. We snuck them away up there.
You're going to join us, Paul, with that?
On behalf of the history team, I'll give Cheryl, if you could grab that, that's yours. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Mark, this is for you.
Thank you very much.
And on behalf of the history team, we thank you for a very good